Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, here today with my much anticipated Ziigaat Buyer's Guide. Today we're going to be taking a look at all the Ziigaat IEMs priced under $1,000 and we're going to be talking about their differences, similarities, and which ones I think are my favorites. This video has been a very long time in the making, and right when I think I'm ready to finish the script, Ziigaat goes ahead and releases 2 more IEMs, so before they release any more, let's go ahead and get this video out. One thing I will say, this video is most likely going to be crazy long, so if you're here for the recommendations, feel free to skip down to that section. I marked in the timestamps. Your time is very valuable. But for those of you who are here for the long haul, let's get started. Before I go any further, I just want to go ahead and say how I acquired each of these sets to go ahead and help communicate any bias that I might have. So, the Nuo, the Cinno, the Arcadia, the Odyssey, the Arete, the Estrella were all purchased by me brand new for review. The Arcanis and the Lush were sent to me by Linsol for review. You'll have seen those videos recently. And the CincoTres and the DosCinco here were purchased by me used secondhand, also for review. I have gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube because Linsol is technically paying for 20% of the sets in this guide. I'm just doing this because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you to Linsol for sending me the Arcanis and the Lush, making this video possible. But as you can see, for most of these, I went ahead and paid for them, so it's my own money in the game. So, since they entered the market at the end of 2023, Ziigaat has been releasing IEM after IEM, ranging wildly in price from the Nuo here all the way up to the eye-watering Jupiter. Recently, though, most of their attention seems to be focused in the sort of $175 to $400 range. As you can see, 8 of the 10 IEMs we're going to be looking at today are in that price range. Speaking of price, for this video, we're going to be using current off-sale MSRPs for these, and we'll save the discount talk for the sort of end of the discussion. At the bottom of the pricing ladder, we have what Ziigaat refers to as their ZiiPulse series. This consists of 2 IEMs, the $20 Nuo and the $100 Cinno here. As we move up in price, we come to the first of what I call the Big Ziigaats. We have the Lush at $180, followed by their collab with HBB, the Arcadia at $200. Then comes the Odyssey at $230, their collab with Fresh Reviews, the Arete at $250. Then you have the original sort of mid-fi Big Ziigaats. You have the twins, the CincoTres and the DosCinco, priced at $270 each. $300 will get you the Estrella, which is their collab with Jay's Audio. And finally, we have the recently released Arcanis at $400 US. The Jupiter would be somewhere around here at $1,600, but I don't have that here with me today, and hence we will not be covering it. So that's pricing for everybody, so let's keep it moving. So let's get started with the unboxing experience and the included accessories. There are essentially 2 types of included accessories here. You have the budget accessories as seen on the ZiiPulse series, and the sort of standard Ziigaat accessories as seen on basically everybody else. Go ahead and start with the budget accessories here. They come with the Nuo and the Cinno, as I mentioned. They consist of the cable and these silicone ear tips. And that's basically it. You know, for the Nuo, which is currently $30 US, that's not awful. A second set of tips would have been nice, as would have been like a carry pouch or a case. But for $30, sure, we can forgive just having tips. The Cinno, on the other hand, at $100, this is straight up disappointing. The tips themselves aren't bad, you know, they're black silicone, they're decently comfortable, and they work well with the sound signatures that both of these have from the factory. But that's it for the accessories on the budget boys. So let's talk about the standard Ziigaat accessories package, which you get on every Ziigaat IEM, starting with the Lush and going all the way up to the Jupiter. What you get is you'll get the IEMs, the cable, you'll get this carrying case, and you will get some ear tips, those being a set of medium-sized foam ear tips, and either these orange core sort of silicone tips here, or these yellow core solid tips here. You know, those right there. I cannot confirm whether Ziigaat has switched completely to using these newer orange core tips on everything, or if certain things still come with these older style yellow ones. What I'm going to do is tell you what came with what for me personally. The newer style sort of orange core came with me on the Lush, the Odyssey, and the Arcanis. And the older style sort of solid core yellow tips came on the Arcadia, the Arete, the CincoTres, the DosCinco, and the Estrella. Of the two tip styles, personally, I prefer the orange core, the new style. I think it's just a bit more comfortable. It sounds a bit more neutral compared to the yellow solid core here. Neither one of these tips, I would say, is ideal for my ears personally. I'd much rather just use my standard testing tips. These two are fine. They don't really make the IEM shine, if you know what I mean. The carrying case is pretty nice, but it has some issues for me. First is the crush resistance. The top and the bottom both bow in rather easily, so if you're throwing these in an overstuffed bag and then that gets tossed around, this might not be the most secure case. My other issue is the way that the zipper navigates the corners here. It almost always gets hung up, and it takes a little bit of extra time to navigate past each corner. That's something that will wear in with time, and it might just take some getting used to, but it's not ideal for me. That said, there also are some things that I like about this case. The Ziigaat branding here on the front is very subtle, which I like. The inside mesh pocket features this sort of double-walled entry that I like. It means you can keep small things in here without having to worry about it rolling around on the inside. It's quite nice. I think it's well thought out. Overall, I would say this is a pretty decent case. Not the best that I've seen included with an IEM, but also not the worst. But yeah, that's it in terms of accessories. You get cable, case, tips. On the $180 Lush, this level of accessories is honestly fine. Modular cable would have been nice, as well as would have a slightly nicer carrying case. You know, a lot of the competition at $180 has those type of things, but you know, at $108, slightly disappointing. It's a bit more acceptable. Where it isn't acceptable is anything sort of starting with the Arete and up, especially the Estrella, the Arcanis, and dear God, the Jupiter. The accessories package honestly looks straight up bad on the Estrella, very poor on the Arcanis, and like I said, horrific on the Jupiter. I know what Ziigaat is doing here. By using the same box, packaging, and accessories for basically all of these sets, they're saving a lot of money in terms of packaging, warehousing, shipping, design, and, you know, well, accessories. I don't necessarily mind that, especially if the money is being put into high-quality drivers, excellent construction, and amazing tuning. Do they manage to sort of pull that off? We'll see. Let's talk cables real quick. It'll be pretty easy. There's 4 designs, but technically it's more really 2. We'll go ahead and start with the first type, which come on the 2 ZiiPulse series here. These are both 2-wire twists with plastic sheathing on the cables. The hardware on both of them is slightly different, but is essentially the same. They're both metal. The Nuo has a sort of lower profile connector with no branding on it. The Cinno has what is the more typical Ziigaat connector with branding on it. Both very similar, as you can see, just the different colors on the cables. The Nuo scores a point by having a chin slider that actually sits flush against the Y-split, if I can get it to behave here. There you go. So you can see the chin slider here is a open hole type, and it just boop, sits perfectly flush against the Y-split, which y'all know I prefer. The Cinno here uses the more standard 2-hole Ziigaat Y-split design that doesn't sit flush against the Y-split unless you really force it, and then y'all know I don't like putting that much strain on my cables here. Outside the hardware and the color, though, both of these cables are very similar. I like them. They're not generally prone to memory. The Nuo has been wrapped up for a while, which is why it's exhibiting a little bit of memory. It doesn't really behave that way normally. They feel pretty nice in the hands. They're overall fine for the IEMs that they accompany. Moving on, we come to the cables on the Big Ziigaats. All of the cables on these are essentially the same. You get the same 4-wire twist into, or 4-wire braid into 2-wire twist, with the same overall sheathing feel, same hardware with branded 3.5mm connectors. You get metal Y-splits with those 2-hole chin sliders that, as y'all know, do not sit flush with the Y-split here. The only real standouts here in terms of cables are the 5-driver twins, which if I grab the DosCinco here, you can see. The cable is the same, but a different color. Instead of the sort of black that you get on all the other ones, the CincoTres and the DosCinco have more like a copper brownish colored cable, which, to be completely honest, I prefer over the sort of standard black on the other 6. This cable doesn't bother me too much, I would say, on the Odyssey or anything priced below that. While it can feel a little bit rubbery in the hands, it's better than other cables at that price range. You know, it behaves decently well. It doesn't negatively impact the sound of the IEM. With the Arete and Up, however, really would have preferred something modular, maybe a little bit softer in the hands, just something more fitting for the price. So let's go ahead and look at the design and construction, starting as usual with the two ZiiPulse IEMs here. The Cinno and the Nuo are designed in a very similar way. These are all plastic shells with simple understated faceplates. The Cinno is actually, as you can see, a little bit smaller than the Nuo in overall shape. They both use fairly standard shell designs. There's no comfort wings or recessions. The Nuo has a tiny bit of one going on, but it's really nothing too intense looking. The Nuo does have metal nozzles. I know you can't see it, but these are actually metal that have been inlaid into the shell there, whereas the Cinno are solid plastic. Outside of that, in all honesty, these are fairly typical sort of all plastic shell designs. Nothing really special about their design. For 30 bucks, you know, this is fairly standard all plastic design. For 100 bucks, I expect a little bit more here, but that seems to be the trend with the Cinno. I think that it having the same packaging and overall build and design as a $30 IEM is a little bit questionable in my opinion. So the build of the Big Ziigaats is all roughly similar. They have sort of similar shapes and similar designs, all resin shells, all metal nozzles. There are a few differences. There's sort of two generations of shell design. You have the Arete, the CincoTres, the DosCinco, and the Estrella, which represent like the Gen 1 shell design, if you will. I denote that with this colored vent on the back of the shells here. And then you have the sort of new generation shell design, which is on the Lush, the Arcadia, the Odyssey, and the Arcanis. And all of those have a more conventional mesh nozzle filter there on the back. Let's do nozzle size comparison real quick. I'm going to put these in order of nozzle size for you guys real quick, and I will be right back. Welcome back. I've gone ahead and ordered them from smallest nozzles on this side to largest nozzles on this side. The twins, the CincoTres and the DosCinco, and the Arete all measured with 6mm nozzles. There is a difference here though. The twins have a different nozzle design. You can see there's like a speed bump there to retain the tip onto the nozzle, versus the Arete has a more conventional nozzle lip on the end. They might look different, but the width on these is both 6mm, so they're exactly the same size. Moving up a step in size, we have the Estrella, which comes in at 6.13mm in diameter. Then the Lush and the Arcanis, which, as you can see here, are using what I think are essentially the same nozzles, different filters, but essentially the same nozzle design. Both of these came in at 6.17mm. And then you have the Odyssey and the Arcadia, which again, I believe are using a very similar nozzle design. And both of these came in at 6.2mm in diameter. The old generation shells and the newer generation shells are sort of differently shaped. If I grab the Arete and the Odyssey, you can see that the new generation shell is a little bit taller than the old generation shell. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll all be taller, because if I pull up even, say, the Estrella, you can see that the Estrella is actually a tiny bit shorter than the Arete, at least when I measured them. So there are small size variations for each of these shells, even though they look identical. We'll see what that does on the tiny ear test, which is coming up, because my wife ranked these similarly but also differently. Some passed, some failed in different ways, and that's mostly down to, you know, the small variations in the shell design, even though they look roughly the same. One last thing I'm going to mention here is driver flex. It appears to be a bit of a trend on these larger Ziigaat sets, particularly on the twins, the Estrella, and the Arcanis. What these four have in common is they all use those dual 10mm DDs with the, you know, horizontally opposed tube-loaded system. I have experienced driver flex on all four of these repeatedly. I've seen lots of reports of driver flex on these four, so if you're going to be getting one of these four, expect driver flex. It's not guaranteed, but it is something that is very common. I have also experienced it personally on the Lush. The Lush also gave me driver flex. I have not yet experienced driver flex on these three, the Arcadia, the Odyssey, and the Arete. I don't know if that's due to, you know, slightly different vent design. Is it down to the fact that both of these are using the topology dynamic driver? I don't know, but I have seen reports of people getting flex on all three of these. I personally have not encountered that. It's an annoying issue. It does distract from the music when you're adjusting them in your ears and inserting them at the beginning. For me personally, it's not a deal breaker. I do understand those of you for whom it is a deal breaker. Overall, all of these are built very similarly. All of them may or may not have driver flex. I would expect these to have them a bit more often than these, just based on my extremely small sample size. I would expect all of these to have very similar levels of durability and to last roughly a similar amount of time. So let's get into the discussion on the specifications on all of these. To help keep the graphics legible, I've split them up into two groups of 5 based on their price. First group is everything $250, sort of less than that. And then the next group will be everything above that. So here's the first graphic. The Nuo is the only single DD set in the entire Ziigaat family. Every other set is a dynamic driver plus balanced armature hybrid, which is interesting. All the way up to $400, there's no microplanars, no piezo tweeters, no bone conduction, no electrostatics, nothing. It's just all BAs and dynamic drivers. In this cheaper group, all of the IEMs except the Nuo are using a 3-way crossover. All the dynamic drivers are 10 millimeters. The Cinno and the Nuo are both using LCP diaphragms. The Arcadia and Odyssey, as I mentioned, are both using that topology diaphragm. And the poor Lush is the only one with a PET diaphragm. The Lush and the Cinno are using custom drivers for their 4 balanced armatures, so no model numbers or information on those. The Odyssey and Arcadia are using the same treble balanced armature, the 33518 from Knowles, but they're using different balanced armature in the mids. The Arcadia is using a single Knowles 29689, while the Odyssey is using a pair of Knowles 32873s. In terms of weight, the Nuo is actually a little heavier than the Cinno, which is interesting considering there's 4 other drivers in the Cinno. The Cinno is the lightest of all the Ziigaats. The Lush, the Arcadia, and the Odyssey are all within 0.2 grams of each other, so the weight in the ear on those can be considered essentially identical. Moving on to the second group, this is the $200 and up group. First thing we notice is that all of these have branded drivers. It's something that started down on the Arcadia, and everything above that is using full branded drivers. All of these are using a 3-way crossover except for the Arcanis, which is a 4-way system. Another interesting thing here is that besides the Arete, which is using a single 10mm biocellulose dynamic driver, all of the IEMs in this group are using that dual horizontally opposed 10mm tube-loaded setup that I was talking about. Interestingly, while Ziigaat describes all of them as isobaric, for some reason the Estrella is described as coaxial. That's pretty interesting because if you shine a light into the shells and look at the drivers, it looks like the exact same dual DD setup as the others. So naturally, I went ahead and emailed Ziigaat back when the Estrella first launched, and I said, what exactly is the difference between the Estrella and the DosCinco and the CincoTres? Because I was expecting it would be down to the phasing between the drivers because they look physically identical. Ziigaat was a little bit cagey about the configuration, but they did confirm that the Estrella is configured differently to the other ones using the dual 10mm. What I took that to mean is that in the Estrella, they're wired in phase rather than out of phase. Let me pull out the graphic here. So I described in the Arcanis video, the DosCinco and the CincoTres, how you've got the 2 dynamic drivers facing each other, and they sort of wiggle sort of together in and out to move the mass of air between them and down the tube. In the Estrella, they're wired out of phase with each other, so they go out and in together like this. I've seen that done in some home theater setups, both the sort of moving together and the moving against each other setups. It has different effects in home theater. How that translates to IEMs, I have no clue, but it's a difference here. So let me go ahead and pull the graph back up. There are some commonalities between some sets here. The Twins and the Arcanis are using the same Knowles 33518 tweeter. The DosCinco and the Estrella are the only ones using Sonian drivers, specifically the 2354 balanced armature. I'm not going to be pulling up white papers or digging in too hardcore into the driver specs here. You can see on the chart which sets use which ones specifically. In terms of weight, there's a bit more variance here than there was on the first group. The CincoTres is the lightest and the Arcanis the heaviest. It's an overall difference of about 1 gram per ear from lightest to heaviest, so while it is more of a weight spread, it's not all that much in the grand scheme of things. Something interesting here. I apologize for the change in audio quality, but this was a bit of a last-minute addition to the video. Unlike the Lecture IEMs, I thought it would be fun to see if the ladies could weigh in on the Ziigaat IEMs. So what I did was I had lady number 4 assemble a set of tiers on how pretty certain IEMs are, and I had each of the ladies rank the Ziigaat IEMs on that tier list. So we'll go ahead and start with lady number 1. As you can see, she continues her ways of being relatively kind to IEMs. She likes the DosCinco, the blue, and the sort of standard version of the Arete, the Estrella, and the Arcadia very, very well. So good score there. Lady number 2 also was fairly kind. She also really liked the Arcadia and the blue version of the Arete, as well as the standard version of the Arete. But as you can see, she also really liked the Odyssey. So that's lady number 2. Lady number 3, sort of a bell curve thing going on. Nothing scored very high, but also nothing scored very low. She liked the Arcanus best out of all of them. Pretty interesting spread here. She did not like the blue version of the Arete or the white version of the Arete, which is a little bit curious. Moving on to lady number 4, the creator of this tier list. As you can see, she didn't rank anything higher than C, which is basically where all of the sort of more interesting looking Ziigaats go. The one that surprised me the most here was the Estrella in D. I don't think she liked the fact that the sort of middle of the IEM didn't have anything going on, regardless of the rest of the resin on the IEM being sparkly. So that one was a bit surprising. And then we have lady number 5, and she, not as kind as ladies numbers 1 or 2, but still had a good spread here. She liked both the blue and standard version of the Aretes as well, and the Estrella up where I thought it would be. I personally think the Arete is the best looking of these Ziigaat IEMs. And a pretty good smattering overall. The DosCinco being down in D, kind of similar to the way lady number 3 ended up ranking. It's a bit of a surprise, but the sort of more sporadic large sparkles on the DosCinco got a pretty mixed response from the voice call when I was doing the tier list with them. So yeah, overall, that's how the Council of Ladies ranked the Ziigaat IEMs. And now, back to the rest of the review. In terms of comfort, all of these worked perfectly well for me. I had zero complaints with any of these in terms of fit. Comfort wing, no comfort wing, large nozzle, small nozzle, heavier, lighter. I had zero problems wearing any of these for 4 or 5 hours at a time. That's to be expected from someone with large ears like me, no real issues. Instead, what I'm going to do is hand it over to Mrs. Audio Amigo for her comfort corner. Take it away, dear.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk very quickly because the result for almost all of these is exactly the same. I'm going to pick on the poor Odyssey as my example. These shells are just enormous. And so what that means is, unfortunately, everybody here in the back row, and also surprisingly the Nuo, just don't fit me at all. I can technically keep a sort of kind of seal with maybe the Odyssey, and for some reason the CincoTres, but not the DosCinco. I don't understand that. But I'm just going to go ahead and say none of these approved for small ears. Even if you can sort of kind of get a seal, it's not comfortable enough to actually do any listening. The Nuo also didn't fit, and I think it's because of how long the nozzle is. I found I put it in and it immediately slid out. The only one that gets a pass is the Cinno, and I'm not entirely surprised. It as well is quite small. It wasn't anything outstanding, but it was comfortable, and so this one passes the small ears test. Everybody else, unfortunately, is a fail.
So, as with my Let's Sure video, I have gone ahead and broken them up into 2 groups just to make them a bit easier to separate. We have the fun Ziigaat sets over here and the sort of studio Ziigaat sets over here. Now, those labels don't perfectly apply to all of these sets, I know. Most of the Ziigaats are going for different things. Even the studio ones can be considered fun. I get it. But these are generally going for a more neutral-ish signature than these are typically going for a much more fun sound. The studio Ziigaats are the Cinno, the Lush, the Odyssey, the Arete, and the Arcanus. And the fun Ziigaats are the Nuo, the Arcadia, the CincoTres, the DosCinco, and the Estrella. As with the Let's Sure Buyer's Guide, I'm going to break them down, bass, treble, mids, technicalities, like my normal reviews. And I'm going to tell you which ones are best at what, using the exact same sort of dog show motif as I did with the Let's Sure special. One change is that I'm going to be doing, instead of straight up rankings, we're going to do tier lists where the placement within the tiers mattered. So if you have the Odyssey and the Estrella in the same tier, but the Estrella is closer to the left than the Odyssey here, that means the Estrella is a bit better than the Odyssey in that tier. And if there is a tie, I will mention it. So I think that will communicate things better. Let's go ahead and get started. Ladies and gentlemen, a very special program. Today we're happy to welcome you to the second Audio Amigo Reviews IEM show, proudly sponsored by Royal Electron. Today we have a varied selection of IEMs from Ziigaat, each competing for your affection with their refined tuning and sonic prowess. Get ready for an exciting showdown where only the most extraordinary IEMs will take home the coveted Best in Sound title. We'll start with the bass, and we actually have a pretty wide spread here in terms of overall amount of bass energy. Starting at the bottom, as we will, we have the Arcanis and the Lush. As mentioned in my reviews for both of these, the bass boost on them is very subtle and makes them both responsive and accurate in the low end without being too overblown. I put the Arcanis above the Lush here because the texture and low end detail is better due to the dual tube-loaded drivers. Up one level, we have the boosted but controlled tier. These, I feel, are a step above the ones below, with the Arete at the bottom of the tier due to having the sort of most subdued mid-bass punch. The other three are honestly mostly similar in terms of bass presentation. The Odyssey is at the top of the tier because it has the best texture. Next up, we have the CincoTres and the Estrella, and both of these I have technically tied because I can see the case for people preferring one over the other. The Estrella is more sub-bass focused. It has more low-end rumble and grunt compared to the CincoTres, but the CincoTres just punches a whole lot harder and sounds more dynamic across the mid-bass compared to the Estrella. Which one you will personally find more fun and engaging depends on if you prefer a mid-bass focused sound or a sub-bass focused sound. Up one tier, however, in the borderline bass head segment is the DosCinco, which is sort of Estrella levels of sub-bass and CincoTres levels of mid-bass, so you get the best of both worlds here. It was the bassiest Ziigaat in the family until the Arcadia came along and went full bass head. The Arcadia is basically a slightly bass-boosted DosCinco. You cannot deny the amount of bass that the Arcadia can chuck out. It is a whole lot of fun to listen to. One thing I will say, however, is that I personally prefer the bass texture and the bass quality on the DosCinco. Something about those dual drivers just works a bit better than the single topology diaphragm for my ears. Ziigaat has varying levels of bass for basically any taste. The only thing they don't have is completely flat. But if you want rolled sub-bass or a perfectly flat bass response, there are other brands you'll have to consult with. I have split the lower mids and the upper mids. Lower mid-range is interesting. At the bottom, we have the CincoTres, which I consider to have the leanest, cleanest, sort of most transparent lower mid-range. For my tastes, it's lacking in body and weight, and while it's not my preference, I know a lot of people who will absolutely adore these crisp, clear, like I said, transparent, analytical lower mid-range. Up one level, we find the Arete and the Estrella, both of which I think are on the leaner side, but which I personally don't find as lacking in body or richness as the CincoTres. The Estrella comes really close to being true neutral for me, but the boosted sub-bass I think has it come across leaner by comparison. Both of these are quite nice, even if I do prefer a little bit more warmth. Up one level are what I would consider neutral lower mids. These three, I feel, toe the line between the lean, clean sound and the sort of warmer, richer, thicker side. I have them in order of warmth here, but there isn't really a huge difference between the Odyssey, Arcanis, or Lush here. I just heard the differences while ABC testing. I think if you took some time between them, you'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference. Up one tier, we have my personal sweet spot, the rich and warm segment, where we find the budget boys, as well as the DosCinco. The Cinno is pretty rich in the lower mids. It's one of the reasons I honestly like it so much. The tonality is just really nice down here. The Nuo is at the bottom of this tier, mostly because it has a lot of treble to balance out that bass. And the DosCinco sits comfortably between the two. Finally, at the top, as you would expect, is the Arcadia, which I has labeled as borderline muddy, as the lower mid-range here is straight up a little bit too thick. It's bordering on dark, slightly muddy, especially on bassier tracks. It does affect the sort of tonality of things further up in the frequency range, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. If you're into that, though, and you want sort of full bass head sound, Arcadia is pretty awesome. Now we move to the upper mids, and here I have focused my evaluation on female vocals and their harmonics. To begin with, at the bottom we have the Cinno. I think this is really the only weakness on the Cinno. I think it's otherwise a very solid tuning. I think it really recesses female vocals a fair bit. If you're not a fan of female vocals, I think it's a fantastic option. Moving up one level, we have the Arcadia, which doesn't really hide female vocals, but as I mentioned, all of the bass can have the effect of adding a bit of huskier tonality to female vocals. While I feel the Arcadia actually does a pretty decent job of controlling the tonal impact that the bass has, I did notice the tonal affectation in my testing, so I have to put it here. I don't think you would notice it too much if it was sort of your daily driver. Next up, we have the Lush and the Odyssey. These two present female vocals so that they aren't boosted or emphasized, but they also don't feel pushed back or de-emphasized. Vocals are maybe a hair more present on the Odyssey than they are on the Lush, but the difference isn't really all that massive. One level up, we find the DosCinco, the Nuo, and the CincoTres. These sets do push vocals forward, but they aren't what I would call emphasized. The Nuo and the DosCinco do have some tonal affectation from the bass, so the vocals aren't as pure or clean as on the CincoTres, but they also aren't super husky and like warmed over like they can be on the Arcadia, for example. Finally, at the very top, we have the sets that I feel have an actual emphasis on female vocals and sort of put them on a pedestal. The Arete, the Arcanis, and the Estrella. All three of these make female vocals pop and stand out over sort of everything else. The Arcanis does so a little bit more than the Arete, and the Estrella makes vocals, well, sparkle and shine. Sorry about that. So now we're going to talk about the overall treble level of these sets, starting with the relaxed Lush. The Lush is, a more neutral tuning, as I said in my review. It makes sense that this would have the least overall treble of everything, as it also came in at the bottom of the bass list. Up one level, we have the sets that I feel have what I would call a natural treble presentation. Sort of enough energy to get across detail and try to balance out the bass, but nothing overly sparkly or intense. The Arcadia, I feel, is much smoother overall than the Cinno. The Cinno can have a bit up and down sort of response. It can be sharp in places and muted in others, but overall they're both very natural sounding when it comes to treble. Next up is the sparkly in places tier. I feel that increases the level of treble in certain places, but not overall, if you get what I'm saying. The Arcanis has pretty good energy in the mid treble that helps with detail, but it recesses the sort of sibilance and sparkle area of certain vocals and percussion. So if you can't deal with that hiss, it's a good option. The Odyssey is chilled out overall, but it has noticeably more treble than, say, the Arcadia. Finally, at the bottom of this tier, we have the DosCinco, which, while it does carry generally less treble than the Odyssey, can have more shine on certain percussion and vocal harmonics compared to the Odyssey, hence the name Sparkly in Places. Above that are the ones that I call bright and energetic, at least for this sort of population. If this were the Ziigaat roundup, these would probably be down in neutral, but for the Ziigaat family, these are the sparkly, airier sounding sets. The Arete just barely sneaks into this tier due to some great airiness and an overall brighter tilt compared to the sets below. The CincoTres is here because that lower mids dip really gives the set this great sense of contrast to the sound, and I find it generally has more treble energy than its bassier twin sister. The Nuo might surprise people being here, as the level of treble it's packing might not seem like anything special if you just look at the graph, which we will later. The fact that the bass is more subdued, combined with the bit of extra energy that it's packing in the mid-treble, I think makes it have a slightly brighter tonality than the graph may necessarily indicate, hence its placement here. I think that treble might even be fatiguing for some people, but I don't think it's necessarily all that bad. Speaking of fatiguing, we come to the top of the list with the Estrella. I like the Estrella. I think it's a very technical, great-sounding IEM. As we'll see shortly, it's a set that I can only enjoy for short bursts. Something in the treble presentation of the Estrella is just a little bit too energetic for me. When I first got it in, took it out of the box, I listened to Armin van Buuren's A State of Trance, and I had to switch IEMs before the show ended. It was just a bit too energetic for me, even at my sort of lower testing volumes. If you're looking for Ziigaat's king of treble, the Estrella is 100% your choice here. And now we'll move on to talk about technical performance. This is one tier list where I will be ranking the sets versus the rest of the IEM market, as I think it would be more fair and more informative than just ranking the Ziigaats against each other. So we'll go ahead and start at the bottom with the Nuo, which isn't bad, but I think it has technicalities on par with the rest of the budget single DD sets in the market. Therefore, the Nuo gets the bottom segment all to its own. Moving up, we have the Arcadia and the Cinno. These are sets whose technical performance and overall detail resolution I feel are hampered by their tuning in certain areas. In the case of both of these, I don't think they sound poor or even deficient in terms of technicalities, but I feel like many sets at that price point can do better than these do. Next level, we have sets that I think are maybe less disadvantaged versus their competition, but might not outright win. These are the Lush and the Arcanis. While both of these aren't lacking in technical performance, again, I feel that they don't necessarily win their price bracket. I think they're more in the middle of the pack for their price bracket and aren't anything super special. Up another level are two sets that I think do quite well considering their price point. The Twins surprised me when I first listened to them, and after over a year of being released, I think their technical performance honestly holds up pretty well versus other IEMs in the $250 to $300 segment. But finally, at the top of the tier, we have three sets that I feel have some of the best technical performance at their price range. The Odyssey, Arete, and Estrella are all, I think, capable of boxing well above their weight classes in terms of technical performance, resolution, and sort of resolving power per dollar. The Estrella especially is very impressive, but as I mentioned, that performance does come at the cost of a fatiguing tonality. As we get into the Soundstage, Soundstage is something that's a bit tricky to evaluate. It's very subjective, and it's going to depend a lot, as I keep saying, on your ears, your brain, the music that you're listening to, how your ears are wired to your brain, and how you personally perceive Soundstage. For me, my ears, my tracks, and my brain, I don't think any of the Ziigaat IEMs here are below average in terms of Soundstage. I would say that the Cinno, the Nuo, and the Arcadia are about average for IEMs in terms of Soundstage. Nothing crushed down and claustrophobic, but nothing that will elevate tracks with average levels of mastering. A rung above that, we have the Lush, the Odyssey, and the DosCinco. These, I would say, are ever so slightly capable of elevating average mastered tracks. I do notice some spatial things here or there while wearing these, but nothing super special or standout, just better than usual. Above that, we have the Estrella, the Arcanis, and the CincoTres, which I feel are good for IEMs in terms of Soundstage. There's good spatial information, even in tracks that aren't mastered for it, and they have great imaging performance in line with the other sort of good Soundstage IEMs on the market. Finally, at the very top, we have the Arete, which I personally feel doesn't just have good Soundstage for IEMs, I think it has good Soundstage full stop. I think it can compete with certain over-ear headphones in terms of imaging. The performance is excellent in terms of imaging. That's what it was literally designed for from the ground up. I expected nothing less. So well done, fresh reviews. You take the Soundstage crown pretty easily here. But let's go ahead and wrap up this section with the highly controversial Best in Sound Award. Please note, this is not where the IEMs will go on my ranking list. That comes later. This list is basically how often I go out and grab these IEMs to listen to them versus the other IEMs in the Ziigaat family. At the bottom, we have the Estrella. And before you start throwing tomatoes at your screens, I like the Estrella. I think it's an excellent IEM, but something about the treble on it just means that I can only wear it for 45 minutes to an hour max before I have to give my ears a break. There's just something there that I find fatiguing. While it's in my ears, I think it's fantastic, but even at lower volumes, I can't have it in for too long. A step above that, we have the CincoTres, which I think is also great. The main issue with the CincoTres is that lower mids tuck. A lot of people love it. People will say that the CincoTres is their favorite sort of fun Ziigaat set, that it's incredible. I agree with that. I see what makes it special. I just think that that tuck makes the lower mids come across too thin for me. My songs, my tastes, it's just the way it is. There are songs where I think that tuck works really well, and I 100% get why people love it. It just isn't for me. Next up are sets that I reach for from time to time, those being the Arcanis, the Lush, the Cinno, and the Nuo. I think they're all tuned quite well. I like them, and I can listen to them no problem. I just find something about each of these a little bit lacking. I wish the Nuo had some more sub bass to help balance out a bit of that brightness. The Cinno, I think, is extremely underrated, but I do think it recesses vocals a little bit too much for my library and its amount of J-pop and K-pop. The Lush is just too flat, and the Arcanis has that, dip in the harmonics that doesn't really work for me, even if it works well for other people. So, these sets are flawed, but nothing that I feel ruins the replay or the music listening experience for me. Next up, I have the sets that I honestly really like listening to. These are the Arcadia, the Arete, and the Odyssey. The Arcadia, I feel, is a very well executed basshead tuning with all of the flaws and benefits that come with the basshead tuning. Put on some EDM, some rap hip hop, and just enjoy the ride with these. They're just a lot of fun, enough treble to balance out the big boomy bass, not fatiguing at all in my opinion. The Arete, I think, have had the biggest glow up of any of the Ziigaat IEMs. It's not that I didn't like them when they came out, I just didn't think they were all that special. But as the rest of the Ziigaats have come out, and as the competition in their price tier has sort of filled in, the Arete have gotten a little bit more unique and different, and honestly, I can really start to appreciate the tuning that Fresh Reviews went for here, hence their position in the top 4 Ziigaat IEMs for me. Then we have the Odyssey, which, honestly speaking, it's a Lush or an Arcanis with more color in the right places for my ears with my music library. It's got a little bit more bass, it's got smoother, more natural vocal harmonics, and a subdued yet detailed treble. I think it's fantastic, and I think it deserves this spot 100%. But at the top of the list, the Ziigaat set that I personally like the most, and the one that I spent the most time listening to, is the DosCinco. This thing is just so much fun. You get Arcadia levels of bass, but with better texture in my opinion, and you combine that with treble that's just a slightly toned down version of the Estrella, and for my ears, this is just a whole bunch of V-shaped fun that I think works for basically any genre. Is it perfect? No, but it's a whole lot of fun. It's awesome. It's one of the oldest sets here, so rock on, DosCinco, rock on. So, with the sort of inter-Ziigaat competition over, let's see if we can't make some sense of the lineup here. What I'm going to do here is combine the comparison and the recommendation segments for each one, and I'm also going to tell you where I would rank each one on my arbitrary rating scale. So, without any further ado, let's get started. So, we'll get started with the $30 Nuo. The Nuo is all on its own. It's the only single DD Ziigaat and the only one priced below 50 bucks. In terms of tuning, however, I think it makes a good entry point into the fun Ziigaat family. The lower end of the market, I feel like its main competition is going to be the Triple Win Vivace, the 7Hz 02, the Tongzu Waner 2, and the KZ Saga Balance. That's an aftermarket cable, just pretend it's the standard KZ cable there. Of this group, the Nuo is honestly more balanced than the rest. It's not quite as bassy as the Vivace or the Saga or the 02. It's a little bit brighter and airier. It gives it a little bit of a sparklier sound. It's not quite as vocal forward as the Waner 2, but it's got better instrument harmonics and more forward mids. At 30 bucks, it is the most expensive of the group, tied with the Vivace here. And it only beats KZ in terms of included accessories, thanks to its nicer cable. But I think the Nuo is quite well balanced. I think it sticks out enough, and it's sort of V-shaped, but not quite V-shaped tuning. It's more mature than something like the Saga or the Chu 2. I think it works well. I'm going to put this in But I Like This, mainly due to the price. If you can get this on sale, I think it can slide up to Brilliant, but as you all know, my rankings are at MSRP, so in But I Like This, it will stay. Compared to its brothers and sisters, the one it's most similar to, honestly, is the DosCinco. So if you're a fan of the Nuo, you dig the sound, look into the DosCinco. It's a good option. The Cinno here is an interesting one. I described it in my Lush video as the sort of prototype tuning for the Lush, as the drivers and the tuning were very similar, and I'm going to go ahead and stick to that assessment here. At or around $100, I feel like there really isn't anything tuned quite like it. The Truthier Hexa and the Tangzu Xuannu are both more vocal forward. The Xuannu is bassier overall. The Hexa has sort of cleaner, leaner lower mids. They're sort of not perfect analogs. I actually think the Awful Explorer might come closest to matching the Cinno's tuning overall. It's bassier, however, and more vocal forward, and the treble is smoother, and it has a better accessories package, but then again, it is also $20 more. The Cinno is sort of unique in this price range. I think at $100, considering the accessories it comes with and sort of the build, it can be a bit of a hard sell, and because of that, at MSRP, I'm going to have to put it in good. But I really like the Cinno. I think it's a fantastic set if you get it on sale. This has gone on sale basically every major sales period for 50% off-ish, if not slightly less than that. I got mine for, I think, $50, and I think that for $50-$60, the Cinno is at least but I like this, and if you can get it for even cheaper, it could go up to This Is Brilliant, considering it's essentially a slightly less refined Lush. If you can get it for less than half the price of this, I think it's a great value proposition. Again, however, my ranking list is about MSRP, not sale prices. This at $100, very hard sell. It's going to go in good. Speaking of the Lush, it's next, and I've already done a full review on this one, so I'll just do a very brief recap here. At $180, the Lush is a calmer, less exciting, less dynamic sounding version of the Odyssey here. It's what I would say is the closest thing Ziigaat has to a flat and neutral sort of studio tuning, and if that's the sound you're looking for, I think it can be a great option for that. There's a lot of competition from other IEMs at this price range. You have things like the Ether from Kiwi Ears, you have the Kiwi Ears KE4, you have the EPZ P50 here, but all of these sets are more energetic at both the low and the high end, and if what you really, really want is something neutral, well, this is it. It's a little understated for my tastes in terms of both tuning and looks, and the accessories aren't great, so as you know, it ended up in But I Like This. Now we come to the first collab IEM in the family, HBB's Arcadia, priced at $200 US. The Arcadia is the warmest and bassiest of all the Ziigaats. It combines the most bass energy with some of the most subdued treble to pull off what is essentially a less detailed sort of baby form of the Kiwi Ears Punch or the Mega 5 EST Bass Edition. There are sacrifices to be made for all of that fun bassiness. The Arcadia has the warmest and thickest lower mids, to the point where I would say it's borderline muddy, and the female vocals are both recessed and tonally affected with a little bit of husk and warmth to their tonality. If your library is chock full of rap, hip-hop, or EDM, however, then the Arcadia I think is a no-brainer. It's very well controlled for a bass cannon with enough detail and sparkle to keep music sounding relatively balanced. In terms of competition, there aren't a lot of bass headsets in this area. You have the KE4, but that's not as bassy as this, and this is also much brighter by comparison. The Deuce exists, but Fat Freak, well, we'll talk about Fat Freak another day. It's cleaner in the mid-range and brighter in places than the Arcadia, but it's much more sub-bass focused versus the Arcadia, which has sub and mid-bass. Outside of these two, you sort of have to go all the way up to the Punch or the Mega 5 EST bass to get this style of tuning. So I think if the Punch or the Mega 5 EST bass are out of your price bracket, this is going to be a great go-to. I'm going to go ahead and put it in But I Like This, as I think the recessed vocals and subdued treble are a little bit of a compromise for this level of bass boost. The more expensive sets, the Mega 5 EST bass and the Kiwi Ears Punch, don't feel as tonally affected by the bass. That's why they command the price premium. I will say, if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of bass and lose some of that tonal affection and pay a little bit more, the DosCinco is a fantastic alternative to the Arcadia here.
Howdy everybody. Unfortunately, the footage for the Odyssey section of this review got corrupted and I was unable to recover it. I guess fortunately it's one of the IEMs that I had already reviewed, so this section really shouldn't be all that different to what I concluded in my normal review. But real quick, the Odyssey of the Studio Ziigaats, I think, has a fantastic balance of both coloration and control. The bass is even with the Cinno and the Arete. The mids have a good body to them without compromising the tonality. The vocals, while not super forward like on the Arcanis, aren't as recessed as they can be on the Cinno. And the treble is essentially smack dab in the middle of the pack for all the Ziigaats. I quite like it. As I mentioned in my review, there's a lot of competition in this price range. You have the Arete, the P50, the KE4, but like the Lush, all of those are much more colored in sound than the Odyssey. Unlike the Lush, however, I feel that this has just enough coloration to make it a bit more of an all-rounder set, and that I think makes it a little bit more special. That's why I went ahead and gave it the This Is Brilliant rating. I apologize for the post-recording. I hope you guys don't mind it too much.
Now we come to the second of our 3 collabs. It's Fresh Review's Arete at an MSRP of $250. As I mentioned earlier, the Arete has grown on me a lot since I first got it, and this is the section of the video that has probably been rewritten the most over the iterations of this script. This set prioritizes clean, articulate imaging and soundstage while still being pretty darn fantastic for everyday music use. The lower mids here are a little bit lean for my taste, but they're not as bad as they are on the CincoTres. They have more body to them, they're a bit more satisfying. What the Arete does really well, in my opinion, is honestly female vocals. They're forward without being dominating and have great harmonics to them. The Arete is airy without being fatiguing, and if I just had to use one word to describe this set, it would just be clean. I think that the best comparison from within the family is actually the Estrella. I can sort of describe the Arete as a less exciting Estrella. So if you like the sort of overall tonal balance on the Estrella but found it fatiguing, check out the Arete. Outside of the family, the EPZ P50 can be a little bit of a fly in the ointment here. It's got richer mids, more exciting vocals, and it matches or exceeds the Arete in terms of detail retrieval. But as I mentioned in my review of the P50, the Arete does have an advantage in imaging and soundstage. Another set to consider is the Dunu Da Vinci. It does vocals very similarly to the Arete. That is to say, really nicely without being extremely overpowering. But the Da Vinci has much more energetic bass. At $250, the sort of standard Ziigaat accessories are really starting to be a letdown here, but the Arete is just a super clean IEM that does imaging and staging extremely well. It's a good all-rounder. The lower mids are lean, but it's not enough for me to really complain about it too much. This one is also going to go in This Is Brilliant. Here come the twins, the original members of the sort of Big Ziigaat club, excluding the Jupiter, of course. At $270, the twins were an interesting entry to the market upon debut. They had 2 different interpretations of sort of V-shaped tuning, with the CincoTres being more harmonish and the DosCinco being a warmer, bassier tune. The CincoTres is a wonderful set for folks who love clean, sort of transparent, lean mids. The mid-bass tuck is executed well. It gives you that sort of subwoofer bass presentation that a lot of folks really like. It combines that with a treble presentation that almost matches the Estrella in terms of energy, and that's the key for me personally. I don't find the CincoTres fatiguing like I do the Estrella, and I think if you prefer leaner mids and you perceive detail up in the treble region, the CincoTres is an excellent choice besides the Estrella. In terms of competition, the CincoTres here is sort of a cleaner version of the Hype 2 from The Audio. That mid-bass tuck makes the bass pop a little more and give it a bit more of a fun sound compared to the Hype 2, but I prefer the sort of richer mids on the Hype 2 personally. You can also sort of think of the CincoTres as a sort of warmer, bassier Supermix 4, if that makes sense. The overall treble is lower in intensity, and that fun mid-bass bump makes it a more contrasty listening experience. The mids on the Supermix are slightly cleaner than on the CincoTres, but the CincoTres is just more bouncy, punchy, more exciting sounding. I'm going to put the CincoTres in But I Like This. It's a pretty good IEM. My preferred twin, however, is the DosCinco. The DosCinco is just a lot of fun to listen to. You get near Arcadia levels of bass and upper treble, but with more vocal forwardness, more sparkle to cymbals, more edginess to distortion, and better instrument harmonics. You also get a slightly cleaner mid-range, which is important to me. If you're treble sensitive to female vocal harmonics specifically, then I would stick with the Arcadia. But if you have a lot of female vocals in your library and you love bass, you'd be hard-pressed to beat the DosCinco here for just sheer fun. Being similar to the Arcadia, the DosCinco can also sort of come close-ish to the Mega 5 EST bass and the Kiwi ear punch. No, it's not as bassy as those two, but I think it does a better job of approaching the level of treble and upper end detail while maintaining the sort of level of bass that those have. It's also more vocal forward than either of those. I already mentioned the Hype 2, but honestly, I prefer the DosCinco straight up to the Hype 2. I think it's punchier, slightly more exciting in the treble, and honestly, it's just a little bit more to my tastes than the Hype 2. The Hype 2 does have a little extra sort of shine in the air region, so if you like extra air, you might look into the Hype 2. But again, personally, I prefer the DosCinco here. Seeing as it's keeping up with sets that are sort of above its price range, I feel really good sticking the DosCinco in This Is Brilliant. But the best part about both of these is that because they are the oldest sets sort of on the table, they go on sale more often, and when they do go on sale, the discounts are deeper, meaning that these two, which have pretty good technical performance, also have some of the highest value potential when they're on sale. I would say pick your preferred signature, wait for a good sale, and pick one up. I know lots and lots of folks are loving the CincoTres, but I'm firmly on Team DosCinco. As we cross into $300 land, we come to the final collab, Jay's Estrella. The Estrella is, in my opinion, the best looking of all the Ziigaat IEMs. The bass boost is focused on the sub-bass, making it very rumbly and satisfying for low-frequency events, and like the Arete, it features a mid-bass tuck that I think is very well executed. The lower mids are clean without sounding super thin or overly lean to my ears. Vocals are nice and forward, and the sparkle on the harmonics is very forward and energetic. It's got plenty of air as well. I really wanted to love the Estrella, but something about the shape of my ear canals and the way my brain is wired to my ears just makes it so that this is just too fatiguing to be my daily driver. It's that stealth fatigue that sets in after like 45 minutes to an hour, and I can't do it. If you can handle the Estrella, you will absolutely love it. But if you're even slightly treble sensitive, I would stay away from this one. Ironically, I think this star shines a little too bright for some ears. In terms of competition, I honestly believe the Performer 7 matches the Estrella in terms of resolution and detail retrieval, and it does so while being calmer in the treble and richer in the lower mids, which to my ears is quite nice. However, the Performer 7 can be bright and fatiguing for some people, so it suffers from the same issue. Just for my personal ears, the Performer 7 doesn't fatigue me the same way the Estrella does. Moving up in price, the T Pro here are sort of a calmed down all-metal version of the Estrella, packing richer mids, a more relaxing treble, and a much, much better accessories package. That said, however, the Estrella, to me, does out-resolve the T Pro, so if you perceive detail up in the treble, the Estrella 100% delivers here. In a similar vein, the $400 Moondrop X Critical Dusk might have less overall sort of treble energy than the Estrella, but the texture and bass quality is a bit better to me than on the Estrella. The mids are richer, the accessories are better, and again, the treble is calmed down. This time, though, I feel like the Dusk matches the detail retrieval of the Estrella. This is going to come down to where you perceive detail and what tracks you use to judge them with. That said, the T Pro is $60 more than the Estrella, and the Dusk is $100 more than the Estrella. So if you don't care about accessories and you just want that sort of maximum technical performance per dollar, the Estrella is a pretty amazing value. While I still prefer the other three sets since they don't fatigue my specific ears as much as this does, I personally think the Performer 7 represents a better value than the Estrella, but I acknowledge the Estrella's shine and brilliance, and I'm going to put it in But I Like This. Finally, we arrive at the $400 Arcanis, the top of the heap for the Big Ziigaats without getting into the Jupiter. As I said in my review for this, the Arcanis is an interesting entry of the Studio Ziigaats. It's got controlled bass like the Lush, clean forward mids and vocals like the Arete, and an upper mids and treble that kind of resembles the Estrella in places but without the extra airiness. The most interesting feature of the Arcanis is how it targets the sort of sibilance and hiss area of female vocals and some instrument harmonics. In terms of competition, in my review, I brought up the Performer 7 here, the Dusk, and the Mega 5 EST. All of them are sort of warm neutral, and I perfectly prefer all three of them over the Arcanis. If you're like me, listening to the Arcanis, you will be missing some sparkle, shine, a little bit of sizzle in the harmonics, and the high end on the Arcanis will come across just a little bit wonky. If, however, you're like my fellow reviewer Jatis, who really finds that sort of thing extremely annoying, the Arcanis is kind of special. It'll give you airy, detailed treble without the most annoying part of the treble in the mix. I think it's really cool when an IEM targets a specific tuning or market segment. It can feel kind of cool if a product appears designed just for you. And if you're one of those people who's sensitive to that area, I think this can be an amazing set. But as I said in my review, for me, this is going to end up in, but I like this. So, the Ziigaat family then. Ziigaat received some criticism for sort of launching a bunch of sets within $50 to $75 of each other. And if you look at graphs, you could be fooled into thinking that all of these are basically the same sound signature with a couple tweaks here and there. But after sitting down and listening to all of them and giving them, a good shake with my testing tracks, I honestly think what they've done here is they've given you like several different flavors of pasta sauce. Some people like their pasta sauce with meat, other people prefer, basil and garlic. Some people want something a bit more spicy. They've got a bunch of different flavors here and sort of prices to suit. The Arcanis and the Lush are kind of similar. If you can afford the Arcanis, you can go for that one. If not, the Lush is sort of the cheaper option. And if the Cinno's on sale, that's an even cheaper option. As I said, the Estrella and the Arete are kind of similar. The difference there is only $50, but the Arete comes in different colors. The Estrella is the better technical performer, so there's a choice to be had there. The Odyssey is sort of the ultimate middle-of-the-road pick for all of these. The Arcadia is the bass headset. The DosCinco is for people who don't want to commit to the bass head sound, but still want to have a lot of fun. The CincoTres is for people who want to flirt with Harman. I feel like they've got something for everybody here. At MSRP, not all of them are the greatest value. I think the Arcanis, the Cinno, and the Lush are slightly hard sells at MSRP, but fortunately Ziigaat tends to put all of these on sale quite often. Best sale deals that I've seen, the Cinno, if you can get it for, like I said, $50, is absolutely fantastic at that price. I would not personally pay more than $30 for the Nuo. I would wait for it to go for $20, $22-ish, or even less than that. I think I got mine for like $19 on sale. Fantastic price for that. The Twins, I've seen them as low as I think $230, $220, and for that price, I think they're a fantastic value. The accessories on all of these are very similar. Not so bad on the Lush, pretty darn bad on the Arcanis, but cables are cheap, and the cases are functional. The cables are, electrically speaking, very sound. Nothing really I can complain about too much. It does seem like they are taking the money that they are saving on the case, the tips, and the cables, and rolling it into the drivers. Starting with the Arcadia all the way up, all of these are using full branded drivers. Yes, the builds are all similar, but again, they're rolling all that savings into branded drivers and tunings that, like I said, kind of provide something for everyone. But that's going to be it. I hope you enjoyed my second ever buyer's guide. It's officially in the books. There were more IEMs this time, so I think this video will probably end up being longer than the Letschuer one. So once again, if you made it this far without using the timestamps, you are an absolute legend. I really appreciate it. I'm going to take this opportunity to announce my next buyer's guide, which is currently in the works. It's going to be focused on Ziigaat IEMs, so look forward to that one. Do you have a favorite Ziigaat set? Which pasta sauce is your favorite? Let me know down in the comments. I know there are plenty of fans of Team CincoTres and Estrella out there, so yell at me in the comments for being mean to your favorites. But that's it for the moment. I really appreciate all of your continued support. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.